A slap, sharp, echoing, out of nowhere, shattered the hush of a Georgia courtroom, and for a heartbeat, everything just froze. One sound, one moment. That's all it took to split open decades of quiet power. I was there. Well, you could say I was everywhere and nowhere in that room. Watching as a 16-year-old kid named Elijah Cross got struck across the face by Deputy Marshal Troy Beckett, a white officer built like a brick wall. His handprint blooming angry red on Elijah's cheek in full view of judge, jury, and every soul in that building. You know what I mean? There was no warning. Just the weight of all those years behind that badge. But Elijah didn't blink. He didn't shrink. He just stared straight ahead, his eyes steady, almost daring the world to do something. Time crawled. The judge fiddled with his glasses, didn't say a word. The prosecutor, tight-lipped, looked everywhere but at the boy. Beckett. He stood there, chest heaving, eyes hunting for a challenge that never came. And Elijah? This kid sat at the defense table in a suit too big for him, looking more like he was headed to a school debate than fighting for his dignity in a system designed to forget him. He didn't touch his face. He didn't cry. His silence was something more, something electric. You could feel it ripple through the benches, the kind of stillness that makes grown folks hold their breath. You see, Elijah was in that courtroom because he'd organized a peaceful sit-in after his teacher got suspended for telling the truth about redlining. No violence, no chaos. Just voices raised where they weren't welcome. The system didn't like it. They cuffed him, strip-searched him, paraded him before the news like a warning. And now, in front of everyone, Beckett just snapped. The slap wasn't just about one boy. It was about all the boys who looked like him, who asked too many questions, who led when they were told to follow. Let me back up a sec, because that moment, it didn't live alone. See, a murmur ran through the crowd. Phone slid up. Somebody caught it on video. Just a blur, but the sound, man. You could hear it like thunder. A woman gasped. An old man whispered to his wife. He didn't even flinch. Even Beckett, after that flash of rage, seemed startled by what he'd done, but his eyes. They said he knew he'd be protected. 3 prior complaints, all buried. No one ever listened. No one ever cared, until now. But then the door at the back of the courtroom swung open. In stepped a tall man in a tailored coat, shoulders like a linebacker, eyes that didn't miss a thing. That was Solomon Cross, Elijah's father. He didn't say a word, didn't even hurry. Just walked in slow, his presence thick as a storm about to break. Most people didn't know it yet, but Solomon wasn't just some dad off the street. He was a senior FBI inspector, someone who made a career out of seeing what others tried to hide. And when his eyes met Beckett's across that wood-paneled room, you could feel the ground shift. Now the silence changed. It wasn't just about fear or complicity. It was anticipation, like the air before a twister. Beckett stepped back. The judge's voice shook. Elijah's shoulders finally dropped, just a little, as if saying, "Yeah, I'm not alone anymore." No one said it, but everyone felt it. The rules had changed. For once, someone was watching the watchers. Word got out quick. A shaky video clip hit the internet before lunch. Elijah sitting silent, not fighting back. The slap, the look, the hush. It caught fire. People sharing it, arguing about it, replaying it. The story stopped being just about Elijah. It became about every time the system protected its own, every time a complaint vanished, every time silence was used as a shield. And behind it all, Solomon was moving quietly, digging into files, calling in favors, tracking down every scrap of evidence from Beckett's past. A twist came from the DA herself, Monica Graves, a tough woman who'd walked the line for years between justice and politics. She watched that clip over and over, and something in her snapped. She pulled Beckett's old files, found more complaints, more victims, all swept under the rug by the same judge. That was when she picked up the phone and called Solomon. "I know what you're doing," she said, "and I want in." For the first time, power started lining up on the side of truth, not tradition. Outside, the courthouse was changing too. Protesters showed up, not just angry, but awake. "We see the silence," their signs said. Inside, hearings started to peel away the layers. Sealed files reopened, lost footage recovered, victims finally called to testify. Beckett sat through it, stone-faced, but the cameras saw his hands shake. Old friends on the force stopped meeting his eyes. He'd been untouchable for so long, but now the spotlight found every crack. The hearing was a spectacle, Elijah testifying with nothing but his own voice, calm and clear. He didn't make speeches. He just told the truth, then sat down, letting the weight of what had been done settle over the room. One by one, other voices joined him, teachers, neighbors, even courthouse staff, speaking up for the first time in years. The judge couldn't stop it, couldn't hide it, and finally, when it was her turn to speak, she did something rare. She named the rot. She named the cover-ups. She named Beckett. And she named Elijah's dignity as the light that had carried them out of the tunnel. Solomon stood, finally, and delivered the last twist, a folder thick with years of suppressed complaints. Left at the evidence table, he didn't ask for revenge. He asked for witnesses. Justice isn't a finish line, he said. It's a choice we make, with or without a spotlight. The judge nodded, struck the gavel, and for a long breath, the room just sat in that moment, knowing they'd crossed some invisible line. But outside, change was still hungry. The story went national. Probes started up. Laws got proposed. Body cams in every courtroom. Outside monitors. Real accountability. The cross resolution, they called it. Elijah went back to school. Shoulders a little straighter, a target, and a symbol all at once. Kids came up to him in the hallway, some to thank him, some to ask how to be brave, some just needing to write down what happened to them, because they'd finally seen that being quiet could be powerful if you refused to bend. Weeks later, father and son stood in Washington, not as heroes, but as proof that you don't have to yell to move the world. You just have to be unbreakable at the right moment. A girl at a youth summit looked Elijah in the eye and said, "Thank you for not sitting down." No applause, no grandstanding, just a wave of kids rising quietly, knowing now the shape of what justice could sound like. A silence that wasn't surrender, but strength. So what happens now? That's on us. When the courtroom doors closed and the world moved on, the question wasn't just whether Beckett would pay or the judge would reform. It was whether everyone who'd seen this story would find the courage to speak, to stand, to refuse the comfort of silence. You want to be a part of that? Subscribe, share. Tell 3 people who need to hear this, not next week, but now. Because the story of Elijah and Solomon Cross didn't end in that courtroom. It started in every place where silence is waiting to be broken. And the next time justice is on trial, you'll know what it means to stand your ground and let the silence speak. You know? Sometimes I think the real noise comes after the gavel drops, not before. That's what nobody prepares you for. How the echoes keep rolling, how the walls remember, and how even the quietest kid in the courtroom can set off a storm nobody can call back. In the weeks after Beckett's badge was stripped, after the judge finally said what everyone had been thinking for years, the world outside didn't just move on. It started to look for itself in every shadow, every small-town courthouse, every hallway where justice had been taken for granted. Elijah, for all the headlines, just tried to be 17 again. He went back to school, the same halls, the same teachers. But now every glance seemed to carry a question. Is that him? Is that the kid who stared down the system? His friends, they didn't quite know what to say. Some tried to joke. Others just stood by a little longer at his locker, silent but present. His old debate coach squeezed his shoulder and said, "Proud of you, son, but be careful. Change burns hot at first. You know what I mean?" And Elijah, he just nodded, wore the weight like a backpack full of bricks, but somehow managed to keep walking. The town, though, man, it was different. News vans clogged the courthouse lawn. Activists held candlelight vigils. But behind closed doors, old power wasn't giving up easy. Folks who'd spent decades covering for each other started to whisper about reforms, about cameras and paperwork, about maybe letting the sunlight in this time. But the resistance, it was thick as summer air, silent and stubborn. Even the new bailiffs walked a little softer, checked the angles, learned quick that every action could become the next viral clip. Monica Graves, the DA, she found herself in the middle of a fire she'd helped spark. Reporters hounded her at every exit. Old colleagues called to check if she was doing okay. And a few warned her to watch her back. Change, they said, has a long memory, and not everybody wants to see it happen. But Monica wasn't backing down now. She doubled down, reopened old complaints, pushed for outside oversight. And when the governor called to ask if she was stirring up too much trouble, she just laughed and said, "Sir, you ain't seen trouble yet." Solomon Cross, meanwhile, Didn't take a victory lap. That's not how he was built. He spent long nights drafting legislation, connecting with whistleblowers, pushing for that cross-resolution to go statewide. Sometimes he'd catch himself staring out the window of a hotel room, Capitol Dome glinting in the distance, thinking about the thin line between exposure and exhaustion, how you could fight so hard to fix one thing and end up breaking something else. But every morning, he put the tie back on, badge hidden but never absent, and walked back into the grind, determined not to waste the opening Elijah had cracked in the wall. But the wildest part, the twist nobody saw coming, was how the silence started to shift outside the courtroom. At a church basement in Macon, a mother stood up and told the story of her son's arrest. Voice shaking but clear. In a high school upstate, a teacher finally taught the lesson on redlining she'd been warned against for years, students hanging on every word. Some texting their parents right from their desks. You could feel it, this restless, uncoiling energy. Young people stopped asking for permission. They started showing up at city council meetings, demanding answers, using Elijah's name like a password, a dare, a promise. Of course, there was backlash. Always is. A conservative talk radio host spent a week calling Elijah a media puppet, and 3 deputies from a neighboring county threatened to quit over anti-police hysteria. Old scars reopened. New lines got drawn in the sand. Neighbors who'd shared sweet tea on porches for decades now eyed each other sideways, wondering which side of history their town would choose. And then came the emails, the letters, the phone calls from far-off places, Chicago, Oakland, Jackson, even from across the ocean. Parents wrote to say their kids felt seen. Students asked for advice. One message, handwritten and taped to the school fence, just said, "Thank you for not folding." Elijah read them all, not because he needed the praise, but because every voice felt like another brick in the bridge he was trying to walk, one that didn't exist before that slap rang out. But you want to know the moment it got really real? It was during a town hall 2 months after the verdict. The crowd was tense, standing room only, city officials sweating under the fluorescent lights. Halfway through, a soft-spoken girl, maybe 12, stood up at the mic, braids swinging. She looked straight at the mayor and said, "If the court could change for Elijah, why can't it change for my brother?" The room went quiet. No applause, no talking, just the weight of truth hanging in the air. Yeah, that happened. The mayor fumbled, promised to review procedures. But you could see it in his eyes. He knew the old ways wouldn't hold much longer. Meanwhile, the fallout kept rolling. Beckett's trial for criminal charges made national news. And every time he walked into court, you could feel the eyes of the country pressing in, waiting, wanting him to stumble. The other officers who once turned away now testified, quietly, nervously, about what they'd seen, what they'd been told to ignore. And the judge, Naomi Reading, found herself transformed from a career technocrat into a symbol, sometimes praised, sometimes blamed, but never invisible again. And yet, for every gain, the system found new ways to resist. Funding for reform was slow. Some files vanished again. This time, at least, people noticed. A new scandal broke in another county, a video, a shove, a bruise. But now, every time it happened, the world compared it to Jasper County, to that day, that slap, that silence that refused to fade. For Elijah and Solomon, the spotlight dimmed, but the pressure never let up. Father and son went to D.C. together, testifying before Congress, shaking hands with senators who barely understood what had really happened back home. The cross-accountability resolution began to move, slowly, painfully, through committee. Elijah hated the cameras, but he showed up, suit pressed, tie borrowed, and when asked why he still didn't say much, he shrugged and said, "Sometimes words just get in the way." The room laughed, but everyone knew he meant it. But life goes on, right? Elijah turned 17. He made the debate team captain, though he rarely spoke. His friends started to talk more, about justice, about what they'd do if it happened again, about how sometimes, you've just got to stay standing. Solomon watched from a distance, proud but cautious, always wondering when the next storm might break. Monica Graves was invited to keynote at a conference on prosecutorial ethics. She opened her talk with a question nobody could answer. What does it cost to do the right thing when no one's looking? The last scene, the one I keep playing in my mind, didn't happen in a courtroom or on TV or under the flash of 100 cameras. It happened on a slow evening, just before sunset, when Elijah sat alone on the front steps of his house, hoodie up, watching dusk fall over the neighborhood. His phone buzzed, a message from a classmate he barely knew. "You changed something, man." Even if folks won't say it out loud. Elijah just smiled, turned the screen off, let the silence settle in. Because the truth is, victories don't always look like fireworks. Sometimes they look like a kid on a porch, breathing easy for the first time in months, knowing the world won't ever be the same. But is it enough? Will it stick? Can a story like this really change the bones of a system, or just scrape the paint? That's the question nobody can answer yet. The cracks are there, sure. Sunlight flooding in where there was only shadow, but you can feel the old hands trying to plaster over the wounds, hoping folks forget, hoping the next Elijah sits down instead of standing up. So, I'll leave it right here, for you, for all of us. What would you have done in that courtroom? Would you have spoken up, stayed silent, reached for your phone, or just looked away? Is justice about the big verdict, or about the little choices, the moments when you decide if you'll watch or act, hide or stand? The world is watching now, not just Georgia, not just America. The next move belongs to everyone who's ever wondered if their silence could break the walls. Yeah, the gavel fell. But the echo? That's still bouncing around, waiting for the next person, the next story, the next stand. If you made it this far, don't let the conversation die here. Drop your thoughts below about right, wrong, what justice should look like where you live. Share this story. Show it to someone who needs to see it. Because what happened in that Georgia courtroom isn't just their story. It's ours, too. And the ending? That's still unwritten.